I don't talk about Q a lot, and there are a few reasons for that, but I wanted to give some of my current thoughts on Q, and talk about what I consider to be the most important Q post of all time, which virtually none of the talking heads on YouTube who comment on Q seem very interested in digging into. The post I'm referring to is post number 916. Q is responding to an Anon who posted about a comment Trump made where he was basically asking whatever happened to Owan and his wife. If you don't know who Owan is, I'm not going to go into it because it doesn't really have anything to do with why I consider this post to be so important. Anyway, the Anon asks Q whether Israel is involved. Q responds, "We are saving Israel for last. Very specific reason, not mentioned a single time." Let's think carefully about what Q is telling us here. When he says, "We are saving Israel for last," he is clearly telling us that the plan does include going after Israel and exposing their role in the deep state global cabal. And if Q is saving Israel for last, that seems to imply that Israel has a very central role. And Q is also telling us that there is a strategic reason for saving Israel for last. And I think this reason should be obvious to anyone who's gone far enough down the rabbit hole. Several times, Q has said that misdirection is sometimes necessary. This is one of the reasons why I don't publish video after video decoding Q post, like some other YouTubers do. I'm not saying anything against them. I actually follow a few of them, and I do follow Q. But I always take Q post with a grain of salt. Not because I think Q is fake or a LARP, but because I understand that some of it is intentional disinformation. Some of it may contain red herrings. And if you get too obsessed with it, you could be led on wild goose chases. So I really prefer to just sit back, watch the show, and try to make sense of everything through a wide lens, zooming into, sometimes, specific things that he and other people draw my attention to, and deciding for myself whether or not that's something to pursue further and discuss further. But just keep in mind that Q himself says that it's necessary to give a certain amount of disinformation along with the good information. And interestingly, I also hinted that this was necessary due to the rules of the game long before Q showed up in my video An Interview with Lucifer. I think that one of the reasons Q uses disinformation and misdirection is to throw off the deep state, because the deep state unquestionably follows Q post. But I think that another reason he does this is to wake people up by forcing them to confront the contradictions in their programming. It's a kind of variation on the persuasion technique of pacing and leading. You offer misdirection, which aligns with the direction the listener is already going, which is the wrong direction. And this is the pacing part. Those who have already persuaded these people to think in a certain way, which is contrary to the truth, have done so by giving them plausible sounding narratives. If you try to tell them right away that they're deceived, they can't hear you. Because the narratives they've been fed sound plausible, and the truth that you're exposing to them sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory. Their programming kicks in, and they think you're the one who's trying to deceive them, because they can't admit to themselves that they've already been deceived. So you begin by saying things that align with their programming. And you can do this without lying, for the most part, because most lies contain partial truths. So you simply reaffirm the partial truths that they already believe, which are contained within the lies they've been fed. But then you have to gradually make them aware of the incongruities in their current view. You feed them something that would seem to follow from the false narrative they've already been fed, but which just doesn't add up. So the more they try to make it fit, the more they become aware of the contradictions and absurdities in the narrative they've been fed. It's no secret that the vast majority of Q followers seem to be members of the religious right. Many of them have probably been raised on conspiracy theories involving the Book of Revelation, the Mark of the Beast, and all the rest. In the future, I'll reveal that most of that has all been one big psyop. If you want to get ahead of me, because I'm not dispensing red pills fast enough for you, just start digging into dispensationalism and the Schofield Bible. There has been a deliberate attempt to distort the Bible and to trick Christians into accepting certain beliefs about the end times and the Jews, which were not taught by any of the church fathers or by any of the churches until very recently. These are all teachings that were crafted in modern times as part of a broader agenda. But the people who follow Q are obviously Trump supporters, many of whom are part of the religious right, and they've all been indoctrinated for most of their lives by their local, controlled, corrupted churches. And they believe all these false teachings about the end times and Israel for the most part. Many of them are Christian Zionists, and if you seem to be against Israel, or if you're accusing God's chosen people of being part of some kind of global cabal that worships Satan, then clearly you must be an anti-Semite. And automatically they shut down, and they can't hear anything else that you have to say. If you have to reveal certain truths to people, which they have been deeply conditioned to reject, you have to begin by dropping breadcrumbs. You have to get them to connect the dots for themselves. In some of Q's posts, he connected Antifa to the paramilitary wing of the Communist Party in Germany. He showed that Antifa today in America gets their name from this German communist terrorist group, and that they even use essentially the same flag. But who were most of the leaders of this group in Germany? Were they ethnic Germans? Or were most of them members of another ethnic group which wanted to seize power in Germany and lead a communist revolution in Germany, like they had in Russia and the Ukraine before, so that they could do to the German people what they had already done to the Russians and Ukrainians? They definitely weren't Nazis. The Nazis were their enemies. It was the Nazis who put down their attempted communist overthrow of Germany. Why do you think Antifa constantly compares Trump to Hitler and calls Trump supporters Nazis? Who were the good guys and who were the bad guys? Dark to light. They falsely accuse Trump and his supporters of being evil racists. Since we see that they use this tactic now, is there any reason to doubt that they've also used this tactic in the past? If we understand that Trump is the good guy, and that they're only trying to vilify him because they see him as a threat to the spread of their global communist dictatorship, should we not also consider that they may have vilified good men in the past who they viewed as a threat to the spread of their New World Order? If we understand that they control the media and spread fake news today, is it so hard to understand that they also control what's published in history books and spread fake history? We see them lying about the imaginary horrors of detention facilities along the border today, when actually conditions are very humane. They compare them to concentration camps. I wonder if they've lied about the conditions of other detention facilities in the past. There are probably some people who have listened to me so far, but all of a sudden they don't like the direction they sense I might be headed in. But I'm just asking questions, dropping breadcrumbs, and challenging you to connect the dots. Why do you think Q might think it's strategically necessary to save Israel for last? I'm going to make a prediction. Virtually everything Q has said will pan out. aside from minor bits of misdirection here and there, which he admits are sometimes necessary. And as more and more is revealed, it will gradually become obvious that all arrows point back to Israel and to certain people associated with this terrorist state and their ambitions toward world domination. As more and more names come out, the harder it gets to avoid noticing that people like Epstein, Weinstein, Schumer, Feinstein, Blankfein, Zuckerberg, Rosenstein, and many others all seem to have something in common. And so do a surprising number of the Hollywood elites and Hollywood pedophiles and the heads of the fake news mockingbird media. When are Q followers finally going to ask the one question that unravels it all? I don't think people like Praying Medic or Just Informed Talk are anywhere close to being ready to see the truth yet. To me, they both seem to be Christian Zionists. They're both good guys, but they're just not fully awake. I've commented on a few of their videos. Once, I corrected Praying Medic when he said in one of his videos that Antifa were basically the brown shirts from Germany. He managed to completely invert the truth. The brown shirts were the ones who put down these Antifa groups in Germany. People like Praying Medic have a long way to go before they're finally going to be able to see through their mental programming. And most of America has even further to go. The Great Awakening is not going to happen overnight. I know that for people who have gone further down the rabbit hole, Q doesn't seem to be addressing the deeper question. But consider this post. Q says there's a strategic reason why they're saving Israel for last. But the people involved in the FISA abuse scandal are being investigated. Clinton is being investigated. A lot of other people are being investigated and arrested. A lot of things that Q has been talking about for quite a while now seem to be coming into the light of public attention. A lot of things he has said would happen have either already happened, or there are clear signs that they are happening or will happen soon. So if the plan is unfolding, and to me it looks like it is, even if it's unfolding slower than I would like, why should I doubt that the last phase of the plan will unfold too in due time? And again, Q says they're saving Israel for last. Obviously, if Q is real, then Trump is in on the plan. And we all know that he plays 3D chess. Would anyone watch a chess game and complain that things aren't happening fast enough? Would anyone complain that in the beginning only pawns are being captured while the more powerful pieces remain untouched? Would anyone complain that the strategy involved saving the king for last? Obviously the king is the last piece. That's checkmate. That's game over. But before you can get to the king, you have to take out other pieces first. And you try to put your opponent in catch-22 situations where they're forced to make a sacrifice. Which brings me to a recent Trump comment that has the media in a frenzy. Once again, he is skillfully playing the media. He is making himself appear vulnerable in order to bait them to attack him so that he can lead them into an ambush. For a while now, he's been framing the radical Democrats, especially the Squad, as anti-Semitic. This is called stealing the frame, or using the enemy's own weapons against them. Of course, many of the things they're saying aren't really anti-Semitic at all. I don't think there's anything anti-Semitic about questioning whether we should be sending billions in foreign aid to Israel, or questioning whether dual citizenship represents a conflict of interest and divided loyalty. But by attacking these radical leftists as anti-Semitic for saying these things, he's forcing them to defend these positions and argue that there's nothing anti-Semitic about these positions. And of course, the media is always going to side against Trump. The Democrats are always going to side against Trump. So after the mainstream media and all the Democrats all defend these positions and argue that it's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel, or to cut foreign aid to Israel, or to boycott Israel, or to refuse to sign a pledge supporting Israel, they're disarmed. They no longer have that weapon to use against Trump and the Patriots when Israel is finally exposed. Are you beginning to see the specific strategic reason why Q might be saving Israel for last? Let's look at what Trump actually said, and I'm quoting from a CNN article here. President Donald Trump on Tuesday criticized Jewish Americans who vote for Democrats, saying it either shows a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty. Trump was speaking to the press in the Oval Office about two Democratic congresswomen barred from entering Israel over their involvement in the movement to end international support for the country because of its policies toward Palestinians. 5 years ago, he says, the concept of even talking about this, even 3 years ago, of cutting off aid to Israel because of two people who hate Israel and hate Jewish people, I can't believe we're even having this conversation. Trump added, where has the Democratic Party gone? Where have they gone where they're defending these two people over the state of Israel? He added, I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, it either shows a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty. So notice that the article attempts to frame this as Trump criticizing Jews. Of course he isn't. He's criticizing statements made by Democratic congresswomen against Israel. He's framing their statements as anti-Semitic. He's calling out anti-Semitism. And the controlled media is trying to call him anti-Semitic for calling out anti-Semitism. How absurd is that? But this is their favorite weapon, and they overuse it. And he's taking it away from them. At the same time, he's using their dual loyalty against them, and using it to put them in a catch-22. They have no choice but to give up one of their pieces. I don't know if I can reveal the secret brilliance of this gambit without saying things I'm not allowed to say, but think about it. Really spend some time chewing on it. The Democrats and the controlled media will not condemn the anti-Israel comments these congresswomen have made as anti-Semitic. They refuse to do it. Trump has called them out on their refusal to do so. He has repeatedly drawn attention to their refusal to do so. And he's used the controlled media to do it. He has forced the Democrats and the controlled media to double down and either defend these statements made against Israel or at least argue that these statements are not anti-Semitic. Understand this. The Democrats and the controlled media can no longer use the charge of anti-Semitism to shut down any criticism of Israel. That's huge. Expect him to push them to double down on this. He is disarming them. He is making it safe to criticize Israel in the future. And he's calling public attention to the problem of dual citizenship. But he's using his political opponents to do it. He isn't the one saying that it's a problem. But he's amplifying the issue and forcing people to talk about it and think about it. And I love the part where he says that just 5 years ago, before he decided to run for office, no one was talking about this, and that he can't believe we're actually having this conversation. We are having this conversation, though. And my question is, would we be having this conversation if it wasn't for him? And is he forcing this conversation on purpose? Is this part of the plan? Trump isn't always what he seems to be. His motives are sometimes hidden. He uses misdirection, like Q. Can you see how this is all setting the stage before they eventually expose Israel? And the cherry on top is that last line, when he says, I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, it shows either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty. This is brilliant for several reasons. First, it's just such irresistible bait. He is baiting them so hard. They can't possibly resist this kind of bait. Second, it's such a sticky catch-22 for them to get caught up in. And since they can't not take the bait, they will get caught up in it. They already are. It almost makes my head spin how brilliant this is. Let me try to explain it just in case you don't see it. The Democratic congresswomen have raised the issue of dual citizenship and have suggested that Jews who have dual citizenship have divided loyalty. And it wouldn't be much of a stretch from there to say that all Jews basically have dual loyalty. But the Democrats and the mainstream media are refusing to condemn this as anti-Semitism. But then Trump exposes their double standard. He points to all these comments that the Democrats are making against Israel and the refusal of the Democrats to condemn these statements as anti-Semitic, and he simply questions how Jews could possibly support a party that refused to condemn anti-Semitism. And by doing so, he actually proves that Jews have a dual loyalty. And he manages to do so by defending Jews against the charge of having dual loyalty. He is taking up the Zionist ADL talking point that calls the accusation of dual loyalty an anti-Semitic trope. And since the Democrats refuse to condemn the anti-Semitic claim that Jews have dual loyalty, Jews are forced to choose between their loyalty to the Democratic Party, which refuses to condemn anti-Semitism, and their loyalty to the Jewish people in the state of Israel. If they choose to be loyal to one, they're showing disloyalty to the other. It's another catch-22 inside of a catch-22. And there's another catch-22 inside this catch-22. Because now, the controlled media, and we know who controls the media, is trying to frame Trump's remarks as anti-Semitic. In other words, according to the media, Trump is anti-Semitic because he's implying that Jews have dual loyalty. But if it's anti-Semitic to suggest that Jews have dual loyalty, then why isn't Trump right when he calls Democrats anti-Semitic for accusing Jews of dual loyalty? Why isn't he right when he accuses the Democrats of defending and refusing to condemn these anti-Semitic comments made by their colleagues? And if he's right, then does that not force Jews who support the Democratic Party to choose between their loyalty to the Democratic Party, which refuses to condemn anti-Semitism, and their loyalty to the Jewish people in the state of Israel? And it gets better. This forces us to ask the question, why do Jews support the Democratic Party? I think it's somewhere around 70 or 80% of Jews that vote Democrat and support liberal policies. So do they vote for Democrats and liberal policies because they believe that's what's good for America? Or because they believe that's what's best for Jews or Israel? If they vote for Democrats and liberal policies because they believe that's what's best for America, will they continue to vote Democrat even though the Democrats refuse to condemn anti-Semitism? If so, they are showing disloyalty to their fellow Jews and to Israel, as Trump correctly points out. But if they're loyal to their fellow Jews in Israel by refusing to vote for Democrats, then they're being disloyal to America because they believe that voting for Democrats and their liberal policies is best for America. Do you see how that works? But let's explore the other possibility. What if Jews support Democrats and liberal policies not because they believe that's what's best for America, but because they believe that's what's best for Jews? And this seems more logical, because if Jews really thought that open borders were good for America, why wouldn't they also think that open borders were good for Israel? If they really think that ethno-nationalism is a dangerous threat in America, why isn't it a dangerous threat in Israel? Israel is literally an ethno-state that uses DNA tests to determine who is and who isn't Jewish enough. to be a citizen? If they think abortion and gay rights are good for America, why not for Israel? If they see it as progress for America to have its first black president and trans first lady, wouldn't it be progress for Israel to have its first black prime minister? And if Americans should be taught to feel guilty about stealing the land from the Native Americans, why shouldn't Israelis be taught to feel guilty about stealing the land from the Palestinians? And if America owes reparations, doesn't Israel? And if America is a nation of immigrants, then isn't Israel a nation of immigrants too, by exactly the same logic? Every Israeli citizen immigrated to Israel from somewhere else. And even if you go back to biblical times, they migrated there from Egypt, and they genocided the native Canaanites and stole their land, didn't they? So there seems to be a lot of double standards when it comes to what Jews think is good for America and what they think is good for Israel. So it's hard not to wonder if they actually support these policies because they think they're good for America, or in spite of the fact that they know they're bad for America. Why would they vote for policies in America that they would never support for Israel? It can't be because they think those policies are good for America, because if they did, they would also think those same policies would be good for Israel. So it must be that for some reason, they see these policies as good for Jews or for Israel, even though they're bad for America. And so they show their disloyalty to America by supporting candidates and policies which they know are bad for America. And if that's the case, then we're led to a very shocking conclusion. The majority of Jews, not all, but the majority who vote Democrat, if they choose to remain loyal to the Democrat Party, which refuses to condemn anti-Semitism, would rather vote for candidates and policies that they believe will destroy America but benefit Jews in some way, than vote for Trump, who's doing what's best for America and putting America first. He's securing the border, rebuilding the economy, cutting unemployment, and renegotiating bad foreign trade deals. And he's also doing good things for Israel. Even Netanyahu has praised him. He's recognized Jerusalem as the capital and moved the U.S. embassy there. He's been a very pro-Israel president. And he's framed himself intentionally, I believe, as a very pro-Israel candidate. After all, look at all the Jews around him. Obviously, he's not anti-Semitic. It's very hard to, with a straight face, accuse President Trump of being anti-Semitic. In fact, many on the far right constantly accuse him of being a Zionist puppet. He has been a very pro-Israel president. And so the majority of Jews, by supporting Democrats and opposing Trump, have shown us something very alarming if we're paying attention. They would rather support a party that's bad for America, even though they refuse to condemn anti-Semitism, than support a president that's good for both the U.S. and Israel, who is pro-American and pro-Israel. It almost seems that they care more about supporting what's bad for America than they do about supporting what's good for Israel. They hate us more than they love themselves. And to me, that hints at some deeper motivation that goes way beyond mere dual loyalty. It almost seems to hint at some kind of deep, irrational animosity, which could only be described as satanic. Who is the God of the Jews? What does the Bible say? What does Jesus say? Doesn't he call the Pharisees the synagogue of Satan? Doesn't he call them children of their father, the devil? What is Talmudic Judaism? Is it the tradition of the elders, which the Pharisees taught? Judaism is the religion of the Pharisees. Jews are the modern Pharisees. Did most Jews accept Jesus as the Messiah and become Christians? Or did they continue to follow the religion of the Pharisees? Not the religion of Moses, not the religion of the ancient Israelites, but the tradition of the elders, the religion of the Pharisees, who Jesus called the children of their father the devil, the children of the father of lies, the children of their father who was a murderer from the beginning, the synagogue of Satan. Doesn't Q say that the elites worship Satan? So who are these elites behind the cabal? Who runs Hollywood? Who runs the media and the major news outlets? Who leads the push for internet censorship? Who pushes for open borders and mass immigration in every country except one? Someone is going to object that not everyone who's part of the cabal is a Pharisee. But tell me whether or not they're members of various secret societies. And who controls these secret societies? What's the religion of these secret societies? Jewish Kabbalah? Who do they secretly worship? The same God, Satan? Okay then, they're basically converts to the religion of which people? They're traitors, but they're traitors who are working for what group? And if they're not members of these secret societies, are they being bribed and blackmailed? Who are they being bribed and blackmailed by? Who are the puppet masters pulling their strings? Is it people like Epstein, who have these blackmail operations involving sex trafficking and pedophilia and so on? Are they being bribed by international financiers like George Soros? Are you seeing the pattern yet? If you're a Q follower, I think it's time for you to ask the one question that unravels everything. And if you're someone who has already gone pretty far down the rabbit hole and you make fun of Q, I suggest you look at Q and Trump with a new set of eyes. I'm going to end with that. This video is virtually guaranteed to be restricted or banned, and it may be the one that finally gets my channel removed from YouTube. So please share it while you can. Feel free to re-upload it. And also be sure to follow me on BitChute and Minds, in case those who were not allowed to criticize prove that they rule over us by silencing me for daring to criticize them. Another catch-22. Do they allow us to expose them? Or do they silence us and thereby expose themselves? Oh, what tangled webs they weave. Thanks for listening. Please consider making a donation if you'd like to help support me in my work. All my links will be listed in the description box. Thanks. Peace.